A few clips ago, you saw that there are many services in Azure. Also, for running your applications, there are a lot of services. Some run your service in a VM or container, some in a Java Spring runtime or a blockchain, and so on. My favorite thing to use is Azure App Service web apps. They are very simple to use and let Azure do the heavy lifting. Let's talk about that. Without Azure, when you run a web application or API, you would create the app, right? And then you deploy it on a server somewhere, maybe running under your desk or in your data center. And that server would run an operating system, like Linux or Windows Server, and some software to host the web app, like a Tomcat server or IIS. That works. In Azure, this works differently. For instance, with App Service, you still create the app, and now you deploy it to an Azure App Service web app. This thing just runs as if by magic. That magic is called Azure Service Fabric, which is a service that you can also use yourself and is used by many Azure services. It takes any workload and makes sure that it runs on a server in its pool, and it makes sure that it runs multiple instances of it, that it is performant, that it can move the workload when a server fails, and so on. Pure magic. So, what does that mean? Well, for us as developers and IT pros, traditionally we were responsible for the app and all of the rest. So, the operating system, the server, and the configuration of IIS and Tomcat. Now, we are just responsible for the app and configuring the app service. Azure does the rest. We don't need to worry about keeping it up and running and performant by scaling it. That is Azure's job. So, what is an Azure App Service web app? It's a thing that runs your web applications. These can also be APIs or whatever is HTTP driven. It can run almost any type of code, including .NET, Java, PHP, and more. It is highly available, and Azure keeps it up and running and promises that it will be through an SLA, which stands for Service Level Agreement. You get to assign your own domains and configure continuous deployment so that changes in your online repo, like GitHub, get deployed automatically. You can also scale the web app, which we'll see later, and you can use easy authentication to secure your app. Also, you can use other services like Azure Traffic Management to distribute globally distributed traffic to the right web app. So, traffic from the US to a web app in the US, and traffic from Australia to a web app over there. App services can also access on-premises services like databases in your own data center through VPNs. And you can use push notifications and the offline sync feature to use web apps as APIs for your mobile applications. Like I said, you can use it to host APIs with and expose their endpoints to the world, including documentation. And web apps can run on Windows, Linux, and can even host Docker containers. This thing is a powerhouse of functionality. So when an app service runs, it runs on what we call an Azure App Service plan. This is associated with a certain price tier, like free or P1 for production. That determines its price and capabilities and its compute power. A nice feature is that you can run multiple app service web apps on the same app service plan, which then share its compute power. So let's see this thing in action. I am in Visual Studio. This is a development environment from Microsoft and you can download a free version of it if you want. I'll go here to create a new project. I want to create a new ASP.NET project for a simple web app. Alright, all of this looks great. Now let me give it a name, like this. OK, and next one. And that should be it. Let's create it. And here we go. This is what the files of this app look like. An out-of-the-box vanilla ASP.NET application. Let me run this thing locally so that we can see what it looks like. Okay, here it is. The simple app that says welcome. So it runs locally. Now let's run it in Azure. I'll go here, right-click and select Publish. Here I can choose lots of things, including Azure. Okay, And now I choose an Azure App Service. And as you can see, I can also choose a Linux one, and even one that runs in a container, and also other container options and a virtual machine. Let's run it in a Windows-based app service. Next. Okay, I can deploy it to an existing app service, but I want a new one, which I can create from here, just like I could in the Azure portal. Let's do it. So here, I'll pick a resource group to put it in. Okay, and it will create a new hosting plan, which is an Azure App Service plan of the S1 tier. Okay, created. Anything that you can do in the Azure portal is available through an API. So you can do all of those things from the Azure command line interface as well, and from applications like Visual Studio that then use the Azure API. It's done. Okay, cool. So now I have a published profile. Let's use that and deploy the app. This will take a minute, so I'll skip to when it is done. And here it is, the app running in Azure. And it has an Azure URL now. Cool. Let's check that in the Azure portal. Okay, here is the App Service web app with all of its many options. And here is the URL where the app runs. Nice.